you're playing a game on screen. The player sees a message from the game that says, "Go defeat Dark Lord." Blah blah blah. Now the player has to figure out like what does that actually mean. The player might assume, oh, this is a typical adventure game. This combat RPG. I'm gonna level up my abilities until at some point I'm gonna fight this Dark Lord. Blah blah blah. When it's actually more like Lord of the Rings, where, oh, to defeat the Dark Lord, blah, blah, you just have to do something completely orthogonal to that. Take this item and drop it into a volcano. And so there's sort of this disconnect or a possible disconnect between what the player thinks they're trying to do and how to go about it, and what the game under the hood requires you to actually do, and how, and the things that is sort of keeping track of. But that's where the sort of GFI comes in.
Right.
It might happen sometimes that you do a thing and then the game says, "Good job." And you're like, what? I don't know what I just did, but there was some goal that the game had in mind that you just achieved.
Yeah.
So nowadays we talk about like games where typically you can be stealthy or you can be kind of shooty.
Like Metal Gear Solid.
Metal Gear Solid is a nice example. I think the ones like Thief,
Uh-huh.
Deus Ex, and so on. So a lot of games are basically, instead of saying, hey, there's a sandbox, you can kind of do whatever you want. Here's a bunch of weapons, here's a bunch of guns, and the player goes, oh, this must be like a shooty game. And then someone randomly discovers that there's a vent and you can actually crawl through this vent and avoid all its combat entirely and face different challenges like, the scars that won't look at you and so on. This goes to this notion that there's two goal hierarchies. One that the game supports and knows under the hood, and the other is what the player thinks the game supports. The game basically has a bunch of goals that are, I don't want to call them secret or hidden, they're just not part of the player's interpretation. And I think that's a really interesting area in sort of game design, is these sort of players discovering goals that are supported by the game.